SABC News investigative journalist Chriselda Lewis now joins us in the studio to take this story further. Chriselda, welcome to the agenda.
Thank you very much, Desiree.
What's the latest in terms of the police investigation?
Look, what we do know at this stage, Desiree, is that only just yesterday, the Hawks unit that specifically deals with cybercrime in South Africa had met with Liberty. They were not at liberty to say exactly what...
excuse the pun.
Yes, yeah. Excuse the pun. Exactly what was discussed in that meeting, but we do know that the Hawks now have the docket with them and will begin their investigations. I guess yesterday's meeting was merely just to understand exactly what had taken place and perhaps to try and see whether they will catch the perpetrators. But I must add, Desiree, that it's very difficult. Unlike many other crimes that do occur, contact crimes, this is very different in the sense that you don't know who you're dealing with. You do not know who is on the other side of the computer. So South Africa has really had quite a tough time dealing with these crimes. If you look at the statistics, in 2016, for example, you had about 8.8 million people who were affected by this kind of crime, whether we talk about spamming, whether we talk about some form of email, a crime that takes place via email.
And yet more and more companies are starting to operate online. So
that's right.
We had Mr. David Munro on SABC News this morning, and there are accusations that their system is not secure enough.
That's absolutely dangerous, and I think quite noble, I must say, of Liberty to concede that what they do have in place at this point is not sufficient. I think many of the questions in some of the people that we spoke to who have been affected, who did not want to go on camera, they're worried about their details, they're worried about personal information, they're worried about whether their policies or insurances are safe.
And what they will be used for.
Oh, absolutely. So really of great concern at this stage, and to see that I think many other companies now would need to start looking at the controls that they have in place to ensure that perhaps a similar situation does not take place in the country, because I wouldn't say this is the first wake-up call that we've seen, Desiree. We have seen many other incidences, yes. Yeah. And I think now huge companies such as Liberty will really need to up their game in terms of the controls and the security measures that are in place at the moment, because the onus is on them to ensure that the details are safe.
They can't give complete assurances, though, can they? What did you take? What was your takeaway from the hacker that you spoke to about how difficult or easy it is to hack a system?
Look, it's not very easy. That's certainly what I got out of the conversation with the hacker, is that this could have happened over a period of time. This didn't just happen on Thursday, as Mr. Munro had indicated. What needs to happen, according to my understanding of what the hacker said, is that you would need to look for loopholes over a period of time. You don't just go onto a computer and all of a sudden you're through to the system of a particular company.
Wouldn't that be different, though, for a person, as has been suspected, that it's an inside job, who has the information?
Very difficult to say if that would have been the case in this particular instance, Desiree, because remember, this is not just one email that we are talking about. This is an entire database from the communication that we've received from Liberty. So it's not just one person perhaps who may have been disgruntled, but it certainly does seem one of the questions that the hacker had also raised was that you do find within this particular criminal activity something that you would call hacktivists. And hacktivists would be those people who would say, we would want to raise a particular concern about some of your controls that you have.
This is how we're going to go about it.
And this is how we're going to go about it. But now for a ransom to be asked for, the hacker says, does raise some serious questions, and perhaps more detail would come through in the next couple of days. But certainly one can, this does raise eyebrows about how many of these companies do business.
You've called it as such yourself, and Mr. Munro was saying they're treating it as a criminal activity. What sort of processes can we expect to follow on?
Look, what Liberty would need to do, and having a listen to that interview that he did with Morning Live a bit earlier on, they seem to be taking the issue quite seriously. But the Hawks themselves, I think, would need to do a whole lot more groundwork in terms of, because the last email that we understand was communicated by the hackers, we're hearing from Liberty now saying that they're not sure if indeed that email was from the people who claimed responsibility for what has happened, but a whole lot more controls would need to be put into place. Legislation as well, perhaps, that these companies need to abide by. Is that sufficient to deal with this kind of crime that we are seeing is escalating? Because if it was 8.8 in 2016, we're looking at a whole lot more now in 2018, and it's something that is not often spoken about.
You know how you said at the beginning of the conversation that you never know where the hacker is? Yeah. What is the incidence of hacking in South Africa? Because sometimes they say the hacker could be in Australia, for argument's sake.
Yeah, absolutely, Desiree. If you look at, for example, what has been common in South Africa has been your spamming, that you would get an email sent to your computer and you'd click thinking that it's coming from a legitimate source. Yeah. That's what we've seen in South Africa. But speaking to the Hawks' cyber unit as well, they did indicate to me that this sort of crime, what we're seeing happening to Liberty now, is something that started in South Africa about 4 years ago. Okay. So we're having now an escalation of this kind of crime where hackers are now going into the databases of big companies for whatever reason, whether they are so-called hacktivists or want to get money out of such an operation. But we're certainly going to see, according to the analysis so far, some kind of concern regarding what has happened here with Liberty.
Please unpack your conversation with the hacker, the bits we didn't get to hear on air.
Desiree, of particular interest, I think, for me, was him telling us that this was bound to happen. And he described this as the evolution of cybercrime.
So it could be any company?
Absolutely. It could be any company, and this was bound to happen. So unfortunately, this time it's Liberty, but there could be another company that is on the cards. If you have, for example, these particular hackers indicating that they wanted to do this to push Liberty to up their security, you're definitely going to see, according to this particular hacker, more of these incidences taking place, and will certainly be in the spotlight because of the complexity of the crime itself.
What did he say motivates them?
A number of things. Pure criminal behavior would be the first. The second would be...
Or testing your technological knowledge.
Absolutely, and that's where the hacktivism comes in, where someone says, I want to teach you a lesson. I want you to understand that what you have in place is not sufficient, and I'm going to push you to put the kind of processes in place to ensure that my money and the money of millions of other people perhaps who have invested within your company are safe. So a number of reasons, but I think it's a pure criminality at the face of it all.
The security is never going to be sufficient, though, is
Never.
it? Because they're always upping their game as well.
Absolutely, and that's certainly what we got from the University of Johannesburg's cybersecurity unit. It's never going to be sufficient. You're never going to get a system that is 100% secure. But what these companies need to do, and the onus is on them, is not to review what you have in place a year ago and think that's going to be sustainable. You need to review the mechanisms that you have in place, the controls that you have in place every single time, because be as it with any other crime, criminals are always trying to be a step ahead of companies, of you and I. So the onus certainly is on these companies to review every single time what it is they have in place.
Chriselda, why is this story important?
It is so important because in the age of technology, Desiree, your children, everyone else's children have smartphones. They are on computers. Everyone has access to a smartphone. Everything is about the internet. And all of your information shared on social networking sites. We're banking using our cell phones. So the age of technology has made it very simple for you and I to bank, to pay our debts or pay insurance companies or whatever it is, not taking into account the seriousness of how much information we put out into the internet space, if I may. So as that progresses in South Africa, as more and more people get on the internet and rely on the internet, all our information is in that cloud. And this exposes just exactly how vulnerable each and every one of us are, and the companies that we perhaps do business with who have to ensure that they have the necessary controls in place.
And the Liberty Bridge, are we hearing the end of it now, or are we still going to find out some more?
I think Liberty will be very selective with the kind of information that they give to the general public, because the issue is still under investigation at this stage. But to try and get to the root cause of it, I think the Hawks will comment on it quite soon. Whether they will catch the perpetrators, very difficult to say, because the kind of people that you're dealing with you cannot see.
Zosie, it's been stunning talking to you.
Thank you very much
so much. Chriselda Lewis, our investigative journalist here at SABC News. Let's take a break. The agenda will be back in a moment.